They called him invisible, a black man in a white world, overlooked by the most dangerous regime in history. But that invisibility became his weapon. While Nazi officers searched for spies, he walked right past them, carrying secrets that would help win the war. This is his untold story. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Stories like these deserve to be remembered and shared. If this story moves you, leave a comment below telling us what courage means to you. Now, let's begin. Paris, 1938. The City of Light was living up to its name, and for Dr. Benjamin Cole, it was the only place in the world where he could truly breathe. He had left America 5 years earlier, not in defeat, but in search of something his own country refused to give him: the simple dignity of being seen for his mind rather than his skin. In the jazz clubs of Montmartre and the laboratories of the Sorbonne, Benjamin had found both. By day, he was a respected chemist, his papers on molecular compounds earning quiet acclaim in academic circles. By night, he played saxophone in smoky clubs where artists, writers, and dreamers gathered to forget the growing darkness spreading across Europe. Benjamin was 42 years old, tall and lean, with hands that moved with equal grace across piano keys and laboratory equipment. He had a doctorate in chemistry from Howard University and had continued his studies in Paris, where professors judged him by his brilliance rather than his race. His apartment near the Latin Quarter was filled with books in 3 languages, chemical equipment, and a collection of jazz records that made his neighbors smile. Life wasn't perfect, but it was his. He had friends, respect, and purpose. The world outside was trembling, but inside his little corner of Paris, there was still light. Then came September 1939, and the light began to flicker. Germany invaded Poland. France and Britain declared war. The cafes still buzzed with conversation, but now the talk was darker, more urgent. Benjamin watched as his Jewish colleagues began to disappear, some fleeing to America or Britain, others simply vanishing into the growing shadows. The Nazi propaganda machine painted everyone who wasn't Aryan as inferior, dangerous, disposable. Benjamin knew that if Paris fell, his freedom would fall with it. The fall came faster than anyone imagined. In June 1940, German tanks rolled down the Champs-Élysées. The City of Light went dark. Swastika flags hung from the Eiffel Tower. Nazi officers filled the cafes where Benjamin once felt safe. Overnight, the rules changed. Jewish businesses were marked. People disappeared in the night. The Gestapo set up headquarters throughout the city, and Paris became a cage. Benjamin could have fled. He had connections, money saved, and friends who could help him reach England or America. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was stubborn pride, or maybe it was something deeper. He looked around at the city that had welcomed him and realized he couldn't just walk away. If he ran, he would spend the rest of his life wondering if he could have made a difference. The decision came on a rainy October evening. A former colleague, a French professor named Henri, knocked on his door. Henri's eyes were tired but determined. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. The resistance needed help, he explained, and they needed people the Nazis would never suspect. Benjamin listened as Henri laid out the impossible situation. The Germans were smart, organized, and ruthless. They had spies everywhere, informants on every corner. Traditional espionage was nearly impossible. But Henri had noticed something interesting. The Nazis, for all their meticulous planning, had a blind spot. Their ideology told them that certain people were inferior, incapable of sophisticated thought. Black people, in their twisted worldview, were primitive, good for manual labor or entertainment. Nothing more. They would never suspect a black man of being intelligent enough to spy on them. Benjamin sat in silence, the weight of the proposal settling over him. Henri was asking him to bet his life on Nazi racism, to use their hatred as a shield. It was dangerous, audacious, and utterly insane, which is exactly why it might work. Benjamin thought about his friends who had disappeared, about the Jewish families being rounded up, about the darkness spreading across the world. He thought about spending the rest of his life as a refugee, always running, never fighting back. Then he looked at Henri and said yes. The transformation began immediately. Benjamin already played saxophone in clubs, but now it became his cover. The Nazis loved jazz music even as they despised the people who created it. They flocked to underground clubs where they could drink champagne and pretend the war wasn't happening. Benjamin became a fixture in these spaces, a talented musician who played what they wanted to hear. He smiled when they complimented his music. He nodded when they made racist jokes. He became what they expected: talented but simple, entertaining but harmless. It was a performance that made his skin crawl, but every night, as he played his saxophone, his eyes and ears were working. Nazi officers drank too much and talked too freely. They discussed troop movements, supply lines, and military operations while Benjamin played on, apparently oblivious. But he remembered everything. His day job provided even better access. The university where he worked had been taken over by the German military for research purposes. Benjamin, because he was seen as a mere technician rather than a real scientist, was allowed to continue his work under German supervision. They never imagined he understood German fluently, or that he could read the technical documents left carelessly on desks. In his laboratory, Benjamin began developing his own tools for espionage. He created invisible inks from common chemicals, inks that could only be revealed with specific compounds. He built a radio transmitter small enough to hide in a saxophone case, using spare parts scavenged from broken equipment. He taught himself codes and ciphers, turning complex military intelligence into innocent-looking music sheets. The information he gathered was smuggled out through a network Henri had connected him to. A note hidden in a baguette delivered to a certain bakery. A chemical formula that was actually troop coordinates passed to a laundry worker who was part of the resistance. Benjamin became a ghost, moving through Nazi-occupied Paris with secrets that could change the course of the war. But ghosts, no matter how careful, sometimes cast shadows. 3 months into his work, a Gestapo officer named Müller began frequenting the club where Benjamin played. Müller was different from the other officers. He didn't get drunk. He watched people with cold, calculating eyes. And he watched Benjamin more than most. One night, Müller approached him after the show. He spoke in perfect English, complimenting Benjamin's playing, asking about his life, his background, his thoughts on the war. Benjamin played his role perfectly, the simple musician grateful for German appreciation of his art. But his heart was pounding. Müller smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He was testing, probing, looking for cracks in the facade. For weeks, Müller circled closer. Then came the night Benjamin had dreaded. The Gestapo arrived at his apartment at 3 in the morning, Müller leading them. They tore through his belongings, searching for evidence of resistance activity. Benjamin stood calmly in the corner, his mind racing. He had been careful, but had he been careful enough? The radio was hidden in a hollowed-out chair leg, the invisible inks disguised as ordinary laboratory chemicals. But there were documents, notes in code, that could be deciphered by someone clever enough. Müller found a stack of music sheets covered in Benjamin's handwriting. complex notations, unusual arrangements. Mueller studied them, suspicion clear on his face. These weren't normal music sheets. Benjamin knew this was the moment. If Mueller realized the notes were code, everything was over. So Benjamin did something audacious. He laughed. He walked over to Mueller, took the sheets, and sat at his small piano. Then he played the music. It was dissonant, strange, experimental jazz that made the German officers wince. Benjamin explained, in his most apologetic tone, that he had been trying to create new sounds, mixing American jazz with classical techniques. It was terrible, he admitted, with an embarrassed smile, which is why he kept it hidden. Mueller stared at him for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed. He called Benjamin a fool and an artist, two things he clearly considered synonymous. The Gestapo left, and Benjamin sat alone in his ransacked apartment, shaking. That night changed everything. Benjamin realized he couldn't work alone anymore. The net was tightening, and he needed to spread the risk. Over the following months, he quietly recruited others. A laundrywoman named Genevieve, who cleaned Nazi officer quarters and found documents in pockets. An old janitor named Louis, who worked in German headquarters and could access offices after hours. A young nurse named Colette, who treated German soldiers and overheard tactical discussions. Each person was someone the Nazis dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. Together, they became a network of invisible eyes and ears, gathering pieces of a puzzle that Benjamin assembled into actionable intelligence. Their greatest operation came in the spring of 1943. Allied intelligence desperately needed the locations of German ammunition factories in occupied France. Air raids could cripple German supply lines, but only if they knew where to strike. The information was kept under the highest security, known only to top Nazi commanders. Benjamin learned that a high-ranking German general would be attending a private celebration at a requisitioned mansion outside Paris. The event would bring together military leadership in one place, and Benjamin's band had been hired to provide entertainment. It was an opportunity that would never come again, and it was almost certainly a trap. Benjamin spent 2 weeks preparing. He modified his saxophone to contain a miniature camera, the kind spies in movies used but rarely existed in real life. Benjamin built it himself, using optical equipment stolen from the university. The night of the party, he wore his best suit and carried death in his instrument case. The mansion was magnificent and terrifying. Nazi flags everywhere, armed guards at every door, the most dangerous men in France drinking and laughing while the country suffered. Benjamin and his small band set up in the corner and began to play. Soft music, nothing that would draw attention. His eyes swept the room constantly. Officers came and went from a study on the second floor. That's where the meeting was happening, where the maps and documents would be. During a break, Benjamin did something that still seems impossible. He simply walked upstairs. When a guard questioned him, Benjamin explained in broken German that he was looking for the bathroom. The guard laughed at his stupidity and pointed him back downstairs. But Benjamin had seen what he needed to see. The study door was open for just a moment, and inside, spread across a large table, were maps marked with red circles. Factory locations. He couldn't photograph them from the hallway, but he memorized what he could see. Later, when the band was asked to play in an adjacent room closer to the study, Benjamin positioned himself carefully. During a loud, energetic number that masked any sound, he raised his saxophone and clicked the hidden shutter again and again, capturing images through the partially open door. Getting out was harder than getting in. Mueller was at the party, and his eyes found Benjamin immediately. There was something in that gaze, a suspicion that had never fully died. Benjamin finished the set, packed his equipment with hands that didn't shake only through sheer will, and walked out. He made it to his car, made it 2 blocks away, before the shouting started behind him. Someone had noticed something wrong. Maybe a guard had seen him upstairs. Maybe Muller's instincts had finally been right. Benjamin drove through the dark streets of occupied Paris, his heart pounding, knowing that he had just signed his death warrant. The film in his saxophone case contained information that could save thousands of Allied lives, but only if he could get it to the right people. He couldn't go home. He couldn't go to any of his usual contacts. The Gestapo would be watching everywhere. He went instead to a small church on the outskirts of Paris, where a priest named Father Michel ran a safe house for the resistance. Benjamin handed over the film and collapsed in a hidden cellar, exhausted and terrified. Father Michel got the film to London within 48 hours. 2 weeks later, Allied bombers struck 18 ammunition factories across France. German supply lines faltered. Operations were delayed. Soldiers went without bullets. It was a turning point, small in the grand scope of the war, but significant enough that historians would later mark it as crucial. And Benjamin's name wasn't mentioned in a single report, but the Gestapo knew someone had betrayed them. Muller launched a manhunt, and Paris became too hot for Benjamin to survive. The resistance arranged his escape through a network of safe houses stretching from France to Spain. It took 6 weeks of hiding in basements and barns, of traveling by night, and freezing in forests. Benjamin left behind his saxophone, his books, his life. He carried only the clothes on his back and the weight of secrets he could never share. He crossed into Spain in July 1943, half-starved and exhausted, but alive. From there, British intelligence smuggled him to England, where he spent the rest of the war training other agents and analyzing intelligence from occupied territories. When the war ended in 1945, Benjamin Cole returned to a world that didn't know what he had done. His work was classified, his heroism buried in files marked top secret. He went back to America, not to Paris, and took a quiet position teaching chemistry at a Negro college in the South. He never spoke about the war, never claimed credit, never asked for recognition. His former students remembered him as kind but distant, as if part of him was still in Paris, still playing saxophone in rooms full of monsters. He died in 1972, his obituary mentioning his contributions to education, but nothing about his war service. The secrets died with him, or so everyone thought. But history has a way of revealing itself. In 1998, declassified documents from British and American intelligence agencies began to tell a different story. Researchers piecing together the history of espionage during World War II found references to an agent code named Nightingale, an American operating in occupied Paris who had provided critical intelligence throughout the war. Further investigation revealed Nightingale's real identity, and suddenly, Benjamin Cole's story began to emerge from the shadows. The full scope of his work became clear. The factory locations that crippled German supply lines, the troop movements that helped Allied planning, the dozens of smaller operations that saved countless lives. Intelligence analysts estimated that Benjamin's work, directly and indirectly, may have shortened the war and saved thousands of Allied soldiers. But the bigger question remained: why was his story buried? The uncomfortable truth is that after the war, America wasn't ready to celebrate black heroes. The narrative of World War II was written by and for white America. Black soldiers who fought bravely were relegated to footnotes. Black scientists, intellectuals, and spies like Benjamin Cole were erased entirely. It was easier to pretend they didn't exist than to confront the contradiction of fighting for freedom abroad while denying it at home. Benjamin understood this, which is perhaps why he never fought for recognition. He had lived his whole life being underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. Why would the end of the war change that? Yet there's a powerful irony in his story. The very prejudice that made his life difficult became his greatest weapon. The Nazis, in their arrogance and hatred, could not imagine that a black man could outwit them. Their ideology blinded them to the threat standing right in front of them, playing saxophone while memorizing their secrets. Benjamin turned their racism into a cloak of invisibility and used it to strike at the heart of their military machine. He proved that intelligence, courage, and determination matter more than brute force. He showed that the most dangerous weapon in war isn't the biggest gun, but the sharpest mind. And he did it all while the world refused to see him. Dr. Benjamin Cole's story reminds us that heroes don't always wear uniforms, and the most powerful weapon isn't always a gun. Sometimes it's a brilliant mind and unbreakable courage. His story was nearly lost to history. Don't let it be forgotten again. If this story inspired you, smash that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss stories of forgotten heroes who changed our world. Drop a comment telling us what other untold stories from history should we cover next. Remember, history isn't just what happened. It's what we choose to remember and share. Be someone who shares the truth. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.